Today, we're diving into one of the biggest turning points in human history, the invention of writing. It's an incredible story of how we went from just drawing what we saw to actually capturing the sound of language itself. So, let's get into it.
And it all kicks off with this one single puzzle. Imagine your only way to write is with pictures. It's great for some things, for sure, but what happens when you need to write a word for something you can't physically draw? Well, that's the exact problem our ancestors were up against.
But before we get to the solution, you really have to picture the world they lived in. Without writing, every single complex idea, every law, every story, every important deal had to be stored in someone's memory. I mean, sure, people had incredible memories, but think about how fragile that is.
And that's exactly why this was such a complete game changer. The ability to lock knowledge into a physical, visible form, it changed everything. It meant that ideas could finally outlive people. It meant societies could build on a real foundation of recorded information, creating a shared memory that could actually span generations.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We're in ancient Sumer, in what is now modern-day Iraq. This was one of the world's very first urban civilizations. We're talking big cities, massive temples, and a really complex economy. And all of that growth created a huge logistical nightmare. They were drowning in stuff they needed to keep track of: grain, animals, goods, people, you name it. So their first attempt at a solution was totally logical. Just draw pictures of things. Seems simple, right? But as we're about to see, this system had one massive flaw.
So this first attempt, it's called a pictograph. A sign that looks like a stalk of grain means, well, grain. A drawing of a sheep stands for a sheep. It's super direct, totally intuitive, and honestly, for simple lists of physical stuff, it worked just fine. But here is where they hit a wall, a really big one. Sure, you can draw a jar, no problem. But how in the world do you draw a verb, like to give, or an abstract idea, like belief? And for the Sumerian bean counters, the biggest problem of all was, how do you write down a person's name?
Okay, let's make this really personal. Put yourself in their shoes. You're a scribe, and your job is to record that your boss, a guy named Kurum, just got a big shipment. There's no picture for Kurum. So what do? This wasn't a theoretical puzzle. This was an everyday problem that was screaming for a breakthrough.
And this right here is where the genius comes in. The Sumerian scribes basically figured out how to hack their own system. They realized they could use their pictures in a completely new, revolutionary way.
The big idea was this. What if a picture didn't have to mean the thing it looked like? What if instead it could just stand for the sound of that thing's name? That's a huge leap, right? From the concrete world you can see to the abstract world of pure sound.
This is the perfect way to understand it. We call it the rebus principle. To write an abstract word like belief, you could draw a picture of a bee and then a picture of a leaf. Suddenly, you're not talking about bugs and plants anymore. You're just using the pictures as symbols for their sounds, bee and leaf, to build a brand new word. This is exactly what the Sumerians figured out.
Okay, so let's circle back to that super practical problem that started this whole revolution in the first place. Because really, it all came back to the need to write down names.
I mean, just look at a scribe's to-do list. Their entire job revolved around being specific. Which worker got their grain ration? Which official owns this plot of land? Which city sent this shipment? You just can't run a complex society on that guy over there. You need names, period.
And this is the really cool part, the key consequence. To write a name like Kurum using these sound-alike pictures, you had to stop thinking of the name as one whole thing. You had to start hearing it as a series of sounds. This wasn't just a new way to write, you guys. This was a whole new way to think. For the very first time, people were deconstructing their own speech into its abstract little parts.
So once they figured out how to write sounds, the whole world of writing just exploded. It wasn't just a tool for accountants anymore. It was on its way to becoming a tool that could capture the entire range of human thought and expression.
And you can literally see this evolution unfolding on the clay tablets they left behind. Writing starts out as simple lists for temples. But as the system gets better, we see it used for royal inscriptions, then for complicated legal codes and personal letters, and then, finally, for epic myths and literature. Just think about that. A tool made for counting sheep ended up unlocking poetry. So yeah, this system eventually turned into that famous wedge-shaped script we call cuneiform. And it was so good, so flexible, that it was adopted by all sorts of neighboring civilizations like the Akkadians and used for centuries to write completely different languages.
I love this because it just perfectly captures the irony, right? The origins of writing weren't grand or philosophical at all. They were practical, born out of the boring need for better bookkeeping. But that simple, practical tool, it accidentally threw open the doors to art, history, and science.
So, look, if there's one thing you remember from all of this, make it this. The real genius of writing wasn't just drawing pictures. It was the abstract leap to realizing a mark on clay could stand for a sound. This idea didn't just change how we store information, it completely changed how we think. It let us, for the first time, actually pull apart our own language and look at it in a totally new way.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big question, doesn't it? The Sumerians were just trying to solve a paperwork problem, and in doing so, they completely rewired human consciousness. So it really makes you wonder, right? What seemingly simple, practical tool are we building right now that could have consequences none of us can even begin to imagine?